Let's talk for just a few minutes about the compounding interest formula. This formula is very similar to the growth formula in the way that it's greater than 1 for what we're calculating, but the rate is divided by n, and n represents words like monthly, annually, semi-annually, biannually, that sort of thing. So I look at our formula. Our formula is very similar to the growth formula, but for the rate you have to divide by n, and then you have to multiply time by n. And n means annually it's just equal to 1. So when it's equal to 1, you can actually just use the growth formula, because dividing by 1 here and multiplying by 1 there doesn't change those values. But it doesn't hurt to use this formula and make that a 1 if it says annually. If your interest is compounding semi or biannually, you want to put n is equal to 2 for both of those n's right there in your formula. For n equals 4, that is when they use the word quarterly. So in the problem, they'll use the word quarterly, and you know n equals 4. And then monthly, you put n is equal to 12. And again, you want to fill it into both of those places in your formula. And then I just put a note over here that A is still the final amount, the same way it is with the growth formula. P is our principal amount, or what you're starting with. R is rate, and T is still time. So those have stayed the same. The new part is what I put here front and center. The little n is what you're looking for. So if in the problem they use one of these words, you have to use this formula to account for the fact that your interest compounds more than once a year. But if it only compounds once a year, you could just put n equals 1. Let's look at 2 examples of how this formula works. So for instance, if you deposit $4,000 into an account paying 6% annual interest compounded quarterly, how much money would you have after 5 years? So we fill in our formula. We're looking for how much we're going to have. Our principal amount we invested was $4,000. We put in 1 plus the rate. Remember to turn it into a decimal, so 6% is 0.06 over, and then the key word here was quarterly. So we knew we needed this formula because they use the word quarterly. So we need to put a 4. Think about there, 4 quarters in a dollar, so quarterly means 4. 4 times a year this would compound. So I put a 4 here and here right beside the time, which was 5 years. Now if you go to type all of this in your calculator, do not type the 4 times 5 without making it either into a 20 or you can group the exponent all together. But I think it's easier just to make that into a 20 when you go to type all of this in your calculator. So then I have already calculated, but you can see if you get the same thing I do, and you would end up with $5,387.42. So when you get a chance, get a calculator and see if when you type that in, you get the same thing I did, because I realize not all of you have a calculator to work with at home. Now let's look at number 2. If you deposit $6,500 into an account paying 8% annual interest compounded monthly, again, when they use a word like that, you know you need this formula instead of just the growth formula. Otherwise, the growth formula would work just fine. How much money will be in the account after 7 years? So let's set up our formula. We want to know how much after 7 years, so we want to know the final amount. So we leave A, and it can be any other letter, but we know it represents the final amount. Our initial investment was $6,500. We put in 1 plus the rate, which was 8%, so we put 0.08, divided by monthly, so n equals 12. And then we put 12 times 7. Again, you either need to group that in parentheses in your calculator or go ahead and do 12 times 7, which is 84, and then you type that in and you'll have no problem. So again, I've already calculated, but make sure that if you typed this all in your calculator and you don't need anything special, in that parentheses you can type what it looks like, and you would end up with $11,358.24. So these are just 2 examples, but like I was saying, if they use one of these key words, you know